And a lot of people will say, that doesn't look like it's painted, which is in a way why the material can just work against itself sometimes, because people go, it's a frequent assumption that it's collage. So you're trying to go, no, this is process. And then people go, oh, you just use tape. And then you go, oh God, that's like saying Richter used a squeegee. Just give me a break. Just give me a break.
Meet James Kennedy, an artist living and working just north of New York City, whose work I have admired for years. And finally, I had the opportunity to sit down with him and have a conversation. You know those people you meet and you just want to hang out with them more because you instantly feel you are on the same page? Not just about art, but also life. James has this lovely mix of humility, humor, and creative wisdom that I so appreciate in artists. It turns out James began his career in theater and performance art. His find your way as you go mode of unpremeditated paintings are gorgeous. They're like balanced assemblages of line, shape, texture, and tonality. Ever since I first saw his work, I was struck by the fact there was such a refined sense of balance. His art is like a perfect theatrical scene where all the characters are synchronized in a sublime balance of tension and harmony. I think you're going to find this conversation nurturing, funny, and ultimately creatively liberating. Be sure to go to art2life.com and click on podcast to see James's abstract art and social links. Another cool thing about James that I love is that he lives and works in a general store from 1875 that he renovated. He joins us from there now. Welcome to Art2Life, a podcast for the creatively curious. My name is Nicholas Wilton, and each week I'll help you rediscover not just the art of your life, but the art in your life. Join me as we explore that perfect blue at twilight, the wild frontiers of art making, and the extraordinary joy of finding your way as you go. James, thanks for joining us today. I can't wait to dive into your work.
Well, my pleasure to be here, Nicholas. And like I say, thank you for including me in this podcast series.
I've seen your work in many places and in galleries. And actually, I think I saw a piece in Nordstrom's department store a couple of years ago. And it was there for quite a while. So whenever I would always buy these certain shirts there. And I always saw that one painting. Anyway, so you're on the East Coast. Whereabouts are you located?
I'm located about 2 hours from New York City. So I moved my studio I was in Chelsea and then Long Island City, and I made the move 2.5 years ago, just 2 hours north of New York City, a little sleepy hamlet called Ancram. So I renovated an old general store, an 1875 general store, and made it my studio.
I saw pictures of that. That is amazing. Was it dilapidated? It had not been used for a long time, correct?
Yeah, 30 years. It had been just sitting empty and neglected. But it was, it was a labor of love. And, obviously my studio practice was a little disrupted for a while, but some things you got to do.
Oh, so good. And how big a space is it?
Well, there are 3 floors and it's roughly 30 by 60 on each floor. So my partner, Bob, he's a ceramist. So there's a ceramic studio and a kiln in the basement. And then I paint in what was the old store. I still use the old post office counter and displays and all that. I mean, I tried to keep it because we preserved it historically. We sort of did have to keep remnants of the old gal here. So yeah, and then we have an apartment upstairs. So it's very much a live workspace. Ideal situation.
Ideal, but it's separated,
yeah.
So you can go downstairs and work and then leave it.
Yeah. Leave it behind.
Yeah. So, for those listening, you guys, you can check out James's work on art2life.com under podcasts. You can see his work, but I've known your work for years. I'm curious, maybe we'll spend a little bit of time taking us back into how you got into your art and how this kind of work evolved, and then we'll kind of bring it up to where you are now a little bit.
Well, my art has it's been quite the journey, really. So I had always drawn and painted sort of when I was at school and until I went to university. But the main thrust of my life at that point was I was a performer, an actor for almost 22 years of my life, with various side steps on that path also. I was an actor. I went to Royal Scottish Academy and then graduated from there. But I had, during my period of study there, had really got involved with contemporary dance. So Royal Scottish Academy had a facility every graduating year where they would send a student with aptitude for movement or dance, usually to the Lecoq School in Paris. I personally mine was not for me. I didn't dig it that much, but I'd really kind of studied Graham technique. So I ended up going to the Graham School in London. That was the side step. So I went into 2 years of choreography and dance there. And then while I was doing that, another sidestep, I was sort of doing a little bit of study on, architectural design had always fascinated me. And because I was doing choreography, the two were kind of like informing one another and the whole thing. So I graduated and then I worked pretty solidly as a physical performer for a while. And then up until I got green carded in 1999, actually as a result of my acting, because I was doing a gig at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin and someone said to me, hey, you can put your name on a postcard and send it to Massachusetts and a computer may give you a visa.
Wow. Just a postcard.
Yeah, just a postcard, put your name on it. I would like to enter the DV-99 immigration program. So that was that.
And was it helpful that you were an actor or?
Oh, it was more difficult, I think. I mean, the person at the American Embassy when I was interviewing for my final interview seemed somewhat, actually, she said, I remember her saying, you're going to find it very hard. I said, okay, thank you. Welcome to America. So I said, oh, I know it's hard already. You don't have to tell me that.
You're hard. That's the start.
Yeah, you're hard. But so painting and drawing, I'd always been doing like little landscapes. Landscape is what I was rooted in. 80s, 90s. And so the turning point for me in regard to going, you know what, I should pursue this more, was the fact that rather than getting on a plane and going to, an easier city, shall we say. I mean, I could have got on a plane and gone to New York or Chicago or Boston. But I decided to go to Los Angeles thinking, that I was going to be a motion picture star in 4 days, as lots of actors do. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, as you can tell. But what saved my life there, I mean, it was like landing on Mars for me, because Los Angeles is a city I found even for an American, it's pretty hard to negotiate at times. The rules of behavior are just so contrary to the way I was brought up in the whole thing. So the thing that kept that kept me sane was, in the early days, I'd had a temp job at an architecture firm, and I got about 90. They were changing their brand, so I got 90 to 100 rolls of Mylar, acetate. And I would roll it up and put it in my backpack, because I didn't have a car. I would cycle everywhere. And of course, people looked at me like I was a Martian.
In Los Angeles, you were cycling around.
Yeah. And people would go, you what? Okay. So I didn't think it was weird at all. Anyway.
You grew up it's Ireland? I mean, was that
Northern Ireland? Yeah. I grew up in Belfast.
Yeah.
And so I was 18. Then I was in Scotland, then London 14 years.
You can walk and ride around there pretty easily.
You can walk and ride there.
Yeah.
Easily. It's a little more compact. But, so I would take this Mylar home in the evening, and I had packed all of my art stuff with me when I came. And that was sort of when I sort of went, I really like this. I mean, it's interesting. As an actor, you're always sort of at the behest of other people. Like, you walk in a room, someone's telling you to be green, blue, red, or orange. And if it's not the orange they like, then you don't get the gig. But as a painter, you somehow, which I still am so grateful for, is you get a chance to nurture your own creative path. You're not answerable to anyone. You get up every day. You enter your studio. It's your space, your thoughts, your time. There's no directive. Sometimes I wish there was.
Yes.
You go, what have I just spent 3 hours doing? But I really, like that. I'm in charge of my destiny in a way. It feels so
Yeah.
much better. It's so much more empowering.
And it's not like you don't get all the feedback, because you get to sort of choose when that show or the whatever you post it, and people can chime in. So I found
Yeah.
that there's lots of people in this art making thing. I used to find it quite lonely, but it doesn't take much to get people in it. But you have total control. You're absolutely right.
And it's also not just control. I think it's the capacity to create without criticism. Or, you know what I'm saying? It's like you're not, well, though I can be quite hard on myself in regard to my practice. I mean, I am quite lonely in my studio space, but I like that because it's no one's informing me. I'm just doing what I'm doing. I'm in my own world, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's how I got here. So I went to Los Angeles. That was a disaster. I went home to Ireland for a couple of years, and then I decamped to New York 2003, and the rest has just been great.
Well, New York, I would think, would have suited you better in a way. Not quite as foreign. I mean, I know New York's crazy and wild, but it feels more, I don't know why I say this, it just feels more European.
It does. And also for me, when I look back at Los Angeles now, so actually I'm going to tell you a really funny story. And I'm glad my partner isn't here right now because he will be rolling his eyes to heaven because I've told it so many times. I'm very much work oriented. So when I say work, I also mean energy. So when I throw energy out, I usually expect something, even this much, to come back at me or, somehow come back into my soul or whatever, feed me. In Los Angeles, it didn't happen. It was so weird. I just couldn't. I kept trying to I kept throwing balls.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not just the city; it's just the way life is. It's maybe the universe going, "This place ain't for you, dude."
Yeah.
But I remember I booked my flight home, and I used to go for walks regularly. I don't know if you're familiar with Runyon Canyon.
Yes.
Yeah, so I used to walk out to Runyon Canyon, and that was, again, I'd, paint and draw, and then I'd go walk someone's dog and go up Runyon Canyon and sit on that huge oversized bench and let my legs dangle and look over Los Angeles. And I booked my flight home, and on the final afternoon, I decided I'm going to take my last walk to Runyon Canyon. So I go out there, and I'm sitting on the bench, and this homeless guy comes and purchases himself on the other end of the bench. There is a long period of silence where we're both staring over the city. And he starts seems to like an internal, conversation with himself. And he's kind of going, yeah. And then he kind of turns to me and he says, "Hey, dude, you see that haze? You see that haze there? Do you know what that is?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Evaporated dreams."
Wow.
And I was just like, I thought it was the most perfect way of describing the ether of intent that Los Angeles must be faced with, every day and daily.
Yes.
And there it was. And so I got on the plane actually feeling quite happy having heard that. So there you go. But New York was easier because people they're just more gritty. It's like, you want a job, you want to work a restaurant tonight, it's fine. You want to it's just, so for me, it's perfect.
And so you were doing kind of some landscape kind of drawings. And when did you kind of start?
Yeah, I was doing oils. What I was doing, I was really in oils then. So I was doing what I would have called, I always used to call them moodscapes. They were very much influenced by the part of Northern Ireland I grew up in. I grew up on this beautiful peninsula called the Ards Peninsula in County Down. And it had these wonderful views to mountains. But for me, my landscapes, I was always more about what was held within, which, Turner was a major influence for me. But what I loved about his paintings was the power that he held in a horizon line. So that for me was my focal point. I just would spend hours going how do I merge land, earth, sea, and create some sort of feeling of, I don't know, pregnant something or other. And so that was my main track. I called them moodscapes. So they weren't, even those were abstract and not, particularly representational. But
it is amazing when you put a horizontal line in a couple shapes. I mean, you get that earth feeling. I mean, it is portent. It has a weightiness to it. I mean, just so many abstract paintings have that, and they're of this world,
Yeah, it's true. So that was, and I was painting those up until 2009, probably 2010.
And you were showing these and pretty much primarily doing art. This whole, like, you came to New York and you were making art. You were no longer doing performance. You just...
Well, I kind of had a fortuitous meeting when I was in LA one day, because it's another part of the story. So when I was in LA, the way I fed myself was I used my architectural design qualification, whatever, and I got a job in the Big Blue Whale for a design company.
Oh.
And I would walk in every day, and I'd walk into their office, and sometimes I used their office as a studio early in the morning. And one day I was walking across the forecourt of Pacific Design Center, and a guy who worked for Baker Furniture said, "Where did you get that painting from?" And I said, "Well, it's mine." And of course, it's totally green. I didn't even know. He's going, "Would you like to come and show this to some of my colleagues in the showroom?" And so actually, that was the first time I ever showed my work, really.
Oh,
I used to sell it at Camden Market in London and things like that. But
right. Wow.
So seeing this huge turbulent landscape in a context was kind of like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was another with the landscapes, which is informing the work a little bit more now too. I had gone from very much painting on wood with oil and playing a lot with dilution to more kind of visceral stuff. Like I was using lots of build, lots of gesso. Then I went into encaustics. I explored the same language, but just through different media. And I've always been fascinated by that, just how it changes it.
Yeah, and I can see kind of some of the things you're doing, this subtlety and the scrim quality to your work, where you're looking through, and there's crazy subtlety. Like encaustic has that beautiful ethereal quality to it.
It does. I love it. Well, I suppose in a way that kind of encaustic works sort of the same way as, like what we're just talking about with the horizon line and shapes. It sort of mutes it or soft focuses it. Mm-hmm. And it just feels really beautiful. And so that was fun.
So you were showing this work, and then at some point you kind of stepped into the more architectural, the more using cut paper and collage. And I'm not entirely sure all of how and I want to dive into this a little bit, but what prompted that?
I stopped painting landscapes actually, because as I arrived, I kind of lucked out in 2006, 2007, because myself and my partner, we were out in East Hampton visiting a friend, and we went to a dinner party, and there was this photographer guy, and he said, "Oh, I've been here for years. I'm just about to give up my studio. So we got this studio right opposite the Pollock Krasner house for like $750 a month."
My God.
And it was like, I couldn't believe it. I was just like, wow. So I painted those in the early days there, landscape a lot. But that was my first intro to art fairs at the time. And I learned very quickly that although they are a wonderful marketplace, nonetheless, they can be, there's no way of saying this without being disparaging, but they can be a place where work can get seen and what I would say is plagiarized. So, but that's almost too flattering, because it wasn't really about my work. It was just the genre. I just noticed that in the marketplace, generally, there was a huge amount of people painting linear landscapes. And I just thought, I just don't want to do it anymore.
Interesting. Yeah.
I just thought, I'm not digging that anymore. But in the background, I was very, not that many people would know by looking at my paintings now, but the catalyst for moving into the more architectural work was when I was in London 2005, 2006. I went to see a Ben Nicholson show at the Royal Academy. There's actually not that many Ben Nicholson works out there, but when you see them, and they're also very tiny and just beautiful and concise. But I loved his again, it was not so much the shapes and forms or the connections that he made, but I'd love to surface. He worked on masonite, and I work on masonite to this day as a substrate. I use a special masonite. It's a eucalyptus masonite that I use from a family-run company. It's very hardy. It's pretty ding-proof.
And it doesn't have those toxic glues in it and, formaldehyde or whatever.
No, it's not like MDF. But what I love about it is it drinks medium. So I play a lot with dilution and density, and it will let things sit on it, but I can maybe wash it 25 times if I want to. But there's still something but the masonite's still there. I mean, you can still see it. I mean, people may not be aware of it, but it's still there. And I love that. And then I can cut into it. That's what I do in the end, is to be able to incise into it. So I started playing around with oil initially on masonite. And then I found a way of translating that, because I was using oil so much, I was starting to get headaches. And I didn't have really good ventilation in the studio I had. So I just sort of transitioned into acrylic, which took a while.
Yes, that's hard.
Well, it's hard, but I found that the key to the feeling that I wanted in the work was to do with glazing. I've never been a huge proponent of using pure color. I've always been very much about color over color to create a color. So I glaze a lot, maybe a blue over an ochre, or an indigo over, and just so there's always something coming through. And I think that's probably fed through from my landscape painting. I was constantly kind of front to back. Yeah, and so I just started to work with that. And actually, the earlier works I enjoyed them very much when I look back at them now. Of course, with all artists' journeys, you kind of go, it's one thing to revere someone and be influenced by the work, but of course, the one thing you want as an artist is to have your own voice. It's like to have your own take. So it took a while. It took 6 or 7 years, just playing around with the language, shapes. And, I keep looking at these posts on Instagram about geometric painters. I don't think I'm a geometric painter at all. I mean, I should really scrub that from my description, because I don't really do geometric painting. I'm non-objective, and I really just play with space.
They're totally spatial. I mean,
totally spatial.
When you were talking about dance and performance and choreography, it was hard to not say, well, of course, that makes a lot of sense when I look at your work. Just the adjustment and the subtlety and the spaces. It's like, to me, there are these invitations to just go in and go behind things and back there, and there are these worlds. I'm sure you've probably done this, but I can imagine you doing set design or for a giant theater. Have you done any of that? I mean, your work lends itself to that, or maybe you're not interested in that.
No, I've thought about it, actually. I've thought about that. There's an interesting thing you just brought up there that I've never really thought about before, is also, in my acting training and in dance, you always have that thing of pulling focus. It's a very important thing. Like when you're in theater and whatever, when you're all on stage together and you're an ensemble, and the same thing with dance, there's a place and time for everyone's moment without pulling focus. And very much when I'm creating my paintings, I do steer what I would call the characters or the inhabitants of the painting. And although they're complex, the main determining factor for me when it is finished is that you look at it as an entirety, and there's no gesture that's making you go, who's that guy stage right? So, and that's quite hard. I mean, the final 10% of the painting is quite hard, because you're constantly going, no, you're screaming too much. Get back there.
Yeah.
So you're constant. So I guess it is. It's total. I've never really thought about it.
Totally is.
Like going,
I mean, the balance that you employ in your work it's so refined, and I mean, they're just hovering there, and you can have, of course, wildly different compositions and everything, but they all share that. You can enter over here and go over there, and no one's coming too far forward, but there's focal points, but they're balanced. And
well, thank you. I like to think that that's, for me, the most important thing.
And it's the most important because, and I'm trying this on, is it because the whole picture hits you simultaneously and not, a 1-2, or why is that important for you?
Well, I think it's it's more to do with, when you're creating a painting, I suppose I'm always aware that they are complex. So I guess the thing that I constantly battle against is you want it to have presence, but you don't want it to be screaming. You don't want it to be like going, "Hey, I'm the bright green guy," or it's just that thing of, which is an important thing for me about color. That's why I don't use color that. I mean, I use tone and color and tones of color a lot, but I'm always like, every time I go to put a primary color in a painting, I just like almost cringe because I'm like, oh God, this is going to be so difficult to deal with. Because it becomes a character, and then you've got to like go, so how am I going to, it's really interesting. But no, presence. Presence is an important word, and I'm sure you would agree with your work. Your work has presence, and that's a very important thing. It's an intangible for the most part, but it's an important thing in art.
I think of it, you're working on a picture and then you change something, and if this thing was walking into the room, now I've changed it. Does it have more potency? Is it more kind of fiery and standing there? Or is it gimmicky? Or is it trying too hard? Or is it too colorful? So I totally, I love that way of thinking about what's the bar, is there presence? That's such a good sort of attribute.
Is that Peter Brook thing, the empty space? So, you spend your years at drama school and then you read, The Empty Space or, Dostoevsky, and you read that just the action of walking across a room is theater. It's like, so you pare it down. It's just, so you have to distill it.
Yeah.
Is your work seems freer than mine somehow. Do you premeditate your paintings, or you just walk in?
No, not right now. No.
Okay.
No, it's just the experience. And I used to worry so much and think so much. There was so much energy spent thinking about it. But now I like to just come in and then just work. And I work on several at once. But
me too.
I share with you that the idea of balance, I'm trying to balance this thing, and I can get it eventually. And that's what seems to hold the work together or make a consistency. It's just this funny thing of balancing.
Yeah, definitely.
In your work, I noticed that you have a lot of areas of subtlety and then areas of boldness. Can you talk about those two? I mean, you talk about this dilution and density, the contrasts of those two opposites, but I really love in your work I call it the quiet conversation. Those subtle, there's so much quiet conversation, and it's all hung together with little bits of the louder conversation. But why is that? And what do you prefer that over just, because you can balance a bold painting,
Yeah, of course. I think it's my way of usually one of the catalogs I have is called Systems. I'll send you that. It was one of the first catalogs I ever brought up. Systems, which basically on which I would take all my paintings, and then I had Mylar inserts the whole way through the catalog, which essentially showed all of the bold gestures that connected the painting. So for me, boldness is really, it's kind of an audience thing. It's informing because you want people to clearly see that you didn't put that little white line in there for a reason. You put it in there for purpose, but you have to tell them that that's where it came from. That gesture is sounding at force, and so that's really. So again, you're playing into energy. It's about energy actually. So you're just like a movement in dance does this. You have to know where the movement initiates. You need to know where it's coming from. So the angle of a line or the subtlety of a line, which is why I build. I don't really do collage at all. I tape pretty heavily, but I build my paintings. Everything is scraped. I scrape like lots of mediums. So it's all cut out and shaped, but it's thick. So it's essentially, it feels three-dimensional, but what I'm doing is I am painting in 2 dimensions, but giving it a kinesis just by the mere density of it. So
wow.
And that's why the back and forth in it is most of the paintings start black, and then I literally start with a dilution of plastic, like a molding paste or something. So it was still black. But after 20, it's not black. And you work and you work out. And then as you get to the outer layer, you're kind of creating what is the surface structure in front of the tonal backgrounds. And those are in heavier density of medium.
And you said that the wood or the masonite that you use does that have a tone to it? Is that always like medium brown, or do you, like when you scrape down to it, it's influencing all the colors then, if it's acrylic probably?
For some reason it doesn't. Maybe it's the mediums I'm using, because I do use a lot of, my main product, I would say, is this. It's basically, I'm painting with very diluted plastic. So it's polymer. It's just a very diluted polymer. And I just build it in layers and layers. Yeah, you always see that brown, but it's kind of got an interesting, well, it's not really brown. It's more of a kind of, it's this color. It's sort of a reddy brown.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yes, right. That's what I pictured.
Yeah, but it does, and actually, it's kind of cool because when you scrape over black, and then you scrape over that, it's two very different things, because it's just constantly the tones underneath coming through, and it's always nice to have. I love that part of the paintings because there's always a remnant of the surface of what was the original surface, kind of there.
And so it's really constructing the work, and it is not premeditated.
No. In fact, the show I'm just about to do in New Orleans, I'm owning up. I'm calling it Reverence and Riffs, because it really is. All my paintings are riffs. I don't start with any preconceived structure or anything. It's a series of events. I start and I put dilution on the panel, and then I go, well, I'll put a line here, and then the line leads somewhere else.
Yes. Wow. So it's performative. It's performance, a little bit for yourself.
A little bit. Well, it's challenging. I've always called them conundrums, because it's almost like mathematics. You're creating a self-generated conundrum for yourself spatially,
yeah.
And then you work it out. So the challenge is to work it out, I guess.
And I'm curious, I see all your work. I see all the completed ones, but where do you get stuck? What's hard for you?
What we were talking about earlier, when you have to do, the bold is always really hard for me. When I go, like I say, I just get really like, oh no. Well, and of course I have to constantly remind myself, it's just paint. You can change it. But when you're in your moment, you're going, this is it. I'm about to put a huge blue curve in the middle of my white painting. You go, no. Anyway, and of course that's what it is. It's just like erase it, paint it, whatever, till you get. Oh, it was much worse earlier. I remember years ago, I was working on this huge commission. It was a 10-foot by 5-foot painting. I could not resolve it. And it was black, white, and gray. It wasn't even color. But when it got to the final phase of putting these black connected gestures, I just kept walking away from it and going, this is terrible. It's just, I wasn't sleeping. And eventually I worked through it, and it got resolved. Did it resolve the way I wanted it to? Not really. I've always had a little reservation about that painting. But anyway, that's another story.
But it's installed somewhere and they're happy.
Yeah, they're happy. It's feel the fear and do it anyway, I guess. Yeah. So
you're not collaging at all anymore?
I never did.
Oh, you never did?
Ever. It's all painted.
Okay.
And a lot of people will say, that doesn't look like it's painted, which is, in a way, why the material can just work against itself sometimes, because people go, it's a frequent assumption that it's collage. So you're trying to go, no, this is process. And then people go, oh, you just use tape. And then you go, oh God, that's like saying Richter used a squeegee. Just give me a break here. Just give me a break. So yeah, it's always been that way. And I paint and paint and paint. I mix so many paints. I got OC, what's that called? Repetitive strain in my elbow from just mixing colors all day.
Are you ever taking the painting, like you have the painting I'm looking at behind you, there's all these corners and planes and surfaces, and do you sometimes glaze the whole painting entirely and then come back in? Or when you're talking about glazing, is it always in these pieces. I mean,
it's good that you're bringing this up. So the painting behind me is kind of very different for me, and I'll tell you why. And it's kind of a really important transitional painting. And I'm hoping that the gallery I'm with in New Orleans may put it in Miami in December. I have a specific way of presenting my work, which is the masonite. I work on the masonite for maybe 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And then when it gets to that point, I build a poplar cradle, a very fine cradle, and it gets glued to the back. And then it gets set in a tray. So that's usually the format for the way I present my work. The panel behind me is actually a cradle. And it had a life as a landscape.
Oh.
But I was beginning to use a little more shape, and so I pulled it out of the storage about 4 months ago. I thought, I'm going to rework this panel because there are elements of the textural work in it. And I thought, because it's quite hard to mask and paint when you've got bumps and crevices and to get hard lines. It's really hard.
Yeah.
So this painting's been really hard, but I'm loving it because I think it's informing me and maybe telling me you should do more of this. There's a lot of gesso on it, so I've glazed. I'm using a lot of tonal glazing over the gesso in the color fields, and then using the new other part of my work, which is the newer part. I'm scraping over the top of the gesso. And when I used to do my landscapes, I used to like chop gesso in lines so it had this great texture, and there's some of that in there too. But no, I glaze. Usually, if I do want to create a little bit of an essence of depth, three-dimensionality, then glaze is the perfect thing to do that with, because you can wipe, you can, play around with that. And the mistakes are sometimes great, but so I'll do that. But yeah, I wanted to use that. I don't know if they'll bite. They might go, oh, I'm not sure we dig that very much, but I don't know.
That never goes away, right?
Never. Never, ever.
It's so refreshing to hear you like, I don't know if they're going to like it,
I'm not worthy.
Right.
Anyway, which to your point, your podcasts are so, I cannot tell you how just full of life they are. And so you're a life force. You really are. You're incredible. Believe me, as an artist, I have my little dark moments, and you're so positive. It's amazing. It really is.
Thanks. I'm learning how to do this, but I'm really determined to treat this podcast kind of like my art, where I don't want to try. I just want to have conversations and figure it out. And, but it's been an interesting, you just notice yourself, you notice yourself in your work. It's the same. It's another form, conversation and story. What's so interesting, James, is that I'm just reaching out to people's work who I really admire, and a lot of people don't have time. And then the people who say yes, what's been interesting is that it's kind of like the things that cross your path when I've been working in the studio, and then you go for a walk, and then a certain color or a bus goes by and it's got a billboard and it gives you an idea. Many of the things that I'm learning, I mean, this has been such a helpful process for me. And the information I get is just perfect sometimes for what it's like. The person who said, what was the hobo on the bench who said that these are the
evaporated dreams.
Yeah, evaporated dreams. There's a lot of that in this, the serendipity of it, but mostly I love that how similar we all are, that all these artists, people that I'm so scared to even talk to, and then people at all different levels. So yeah, it's really, and I was curious, James, so your partner is an artist, and you said he's a ceramicist.
Yeah.
So you're in this beehive in a way. I mean, his work is up there. What is his work like? I mean, just a little, I'm just trying to picture. And then
his work is kind of, well, he would admit that his work has changed since he met me. I mean, he is an incredible functional. I mean, he turns just the most exquisite, properly balanced, just beautiful. He's really good at that. But since I've met him, he's diversified a bit into sculpture, and he's finding his way. And there are definitely little bits of vocabulary in there that seem to have fallen off a James Kennedy painting or whatever. But no, he's great. I mean, he's way braver than I am because, he'll explore more. Unfortunately, sometimes I don't get a chance, which is why I just value your podcast so much, because you're constantly urging people to take the time to explore, because this big old cruel art world where you have to earn the living all the time sometimes doesn't allow you space for that. Be careful what you ask for, I guess is what they say. But,
yeah.
So he will explore. I'll go down and I go, oh my God, you're making, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just doing it. I'm like, I don't have time to do it. That's not fair. How dare you be more creative, more free?
Right. I mean, James, do you ever just take those brushes and just paint like the Fauvist painters? Or, I mean, do you sometimes,
No, I just throw paint pots around in anger for the most part. No, I have, which you'll see if you go to my website, but I do have a series of, it's funny, Bob, speaking of freeness, so Bob always says to me, that is your voice. He doesn't think these paintings are me. I'm like, okay. So I have this whole other series called Anatomical Fictions, which are much more figurative, influenced, I guess, a little bit by my other grand champion, Francis Bacon. Kind of dark. But, oh God, I just don't have time. It's like,
I know.
I should allot it more, but I don't, because I just seem to always find myself. I mean, I'm sure you can relate. If you're investing in process-based work, then it's process-based. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So sometimes you got to soldier on. And there will be moments where I'll do that.
Do you work on like 6 paintings at once, or is it one painting per month, or how do you work?
I, like you, because I think it's really good to work on lots at one time, because they kind of inform each other. And sometimes a spatial problem that you'll have in one painting, you'll work out by working on another one.
Yeah. And then is there some kind of surface or some way that you tie it all together at the end with like do you treat all this? I mean, because you're scraping some of the plastic, is it gloss? Is it matte? Does it matter to you? Is it all mixed in, or how do you unify it?
Well, I used to spend endless hours at the end, like matting things out, because I don't really like shiny acrylic. It's funny, a lot of acrylics are I did this residency about many years ago. Yeah, 6 years ago, golden paint.
Oh, really?
Golden acrylic. So
that's
I went
cool.
there and I spent like 5 weeks at Golden Acrylics at the factory, and we got to hang out in the studios and experiment with every single one of their products. But I gave them a hard time one day, and I said, "What's up with your acrylics? They're all so glossy."
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, you just need," and oddly enough, they brought out a range of acrylics that are matte, which is good. But for the most part, I tend to add either Liquitex Ultra Matte to my acrylics when I'm painting with them, so I don't have to varnish at the end, really.
Oh, that's nice.
You can, and they told me that. They said, "Well, just use some golden matte medium in your acrylic and it'll matte out." And so that's what I do. And the glazing medium that I use has a lovely finish because it's not really, I do have a bit of a Jones about, a bit of a pet peeve is like uneven surfaces. Like when I see something that's more sheeny than the other, I like it to be knitted.
Yes.
But yeah, matte medium, ultra matte medium, Liquitex. Sorry, product placement. Very good.
Yes. Okay. But you use glazing mediums, because I just use water. I've never really figured that out. But
glazing mediums are just a little bit more. They're a little more controllable. It's almost like a scumble. Mm-hmm. It's like a scumble.
Yeah.
And they're also like everything. They're also sort of a combination, to use the technical terms from Golden. They're an extender and a surfactant.
Oh man, you did learn some things.
A glaze will extend how long you can work. Though, interestingly, again, back to Golden, they brought out for oil painters a range of paints, which I experimented with but really couldn't use, which was their open. I found they marked quite a lot. Sorry, Golden, but they just give you more working time.
Yeah, yeah.
But the problem was you didn't really know when that working time was up. So sometimes there were remnants of marks that you didn't want. But
yeah. And now one more thing just on your process. I use a painting guide, like a painting shield that like a house painter uses to paint trim around windows. Do you use that? Or do you tape everything?
I use that a little bit where needed. I'll do it if I want something that's less precise. Then I'll do that. The tape really isn't so much for the hard edge for me. The tape I use as a depth gauge. So I'll, again, you're sort of like creating vibration, and it's just like all related to depth. So you lay 2 pieces of tape. You're doing a scrape. It's going to be deeper.
I
one
see.
layer of tape. It's one scrape.
Because you scrape on top of the tape and the painted surface.
I have these plastic credit cards. That's what I work with all day long. So I scrape and fill in. And then, again, where those mediums are great is if you put them over another color, then because that product I spoke of earlier, which is a plastic modeling paste, it's not color. It's just white plastic. So it has transparency. So it will let you see what lies beneath when you scrape it over like an ochre.
Oh,
like
beautiful.
An ochre shape or whatever. So it's always nice to see those marks.
And you don't use, do you use trowels? I'm kind of geeking out here, but I'm just...
Not really. For the most part, I just use little plastic cards. And then if I need to, like if I'm doing some of the paintings in the show, some of the recent paintings have more white space in the center. So when I have to do a really huge scrape, I'll use that thing that you were using. Is that what it is? That
metal? I think it's called a paint guide. Yeah.
So I'll take that and I'll just like you're in a printing workshop or whatever, and I'll scrape that across.
Okay.
Those things are great.
Yeah. But it's interesting how you call them, if you don't need to be so precise. For me, I'm using them for the precision because my stuff is so all over the place. So as we kind of nearing this thing, and we could talk forever, but as the end here, I'm just curious, do you have a sense of, or what you're excited about, what's coming up for you that you're thinking of making, or, you're going to start using kerosene or something surprising? Or
I'm going to start, putting kerosene on my paintings after I've worked on them for a month.
I knew it.
I thought conceptually that would be really interesting. No, I mean, I think, like I said earlier, I think if anything in 2023, I have a residency coming up next year, which I'm excited about. So I did transfer the language to prints, which was really interesting. That taught me a lot 2 years ago. I went to Stony Road Press, who are like master printers in Dublin, and I spent a month with, and it was really involved because you can imagine. Because I'm not premeditated in my work, I had to be for that, because they went, okay, you're going to have to create that print, but you're going to have to dissect it into 5 separate plates. And I was like, I want my head was going to explode. So I had to do that. But it taught me a lot about the work. It taught me so much about connection and what I was trying to do. But no, as a result of that, I was invited to this. There's a wonderful gallery in Philadelphia called Dolan Maxwell. And the couple that formed that gallery years ago bought this remote little building in County Mayo in Ireland. And it's now called the Ballinglen Art Museum. And they have a guest residency. And so I got invited to go there next October. So I'm going to go, maybe I'll go back to landscape. There's lots of cliffs.
Yeah. I love how you do these residences, and it seems like you break out and get out of the studio and go to new places. And that's so smart.
It's good to do it sometimes because, it's what we were talking about earlier. If you don't allow yourself to do it in the studio, when the hell are you going to do it?
Yeah.
So a residency provides the perfect opportunity.
That's great. So you have a show coming up. Where is that?
It's at Callum Contemporary in New Orleans. This is my 4th solo show with them. So it's Reverence and Rifts, which is basically a mixture of paintings that really kind of pay tribute to painters that have influenced me without telling anyone who they are.
Oh, really? Wow.
And the riffs are my paintings. Reverence and Rifts.
Fantastic. Well, listen, James, it's just been just lovely talking with you and learning about your work. And I so understand it so much better now. Really, really. It's beautiful.
Well, likewise, it's been great talking to you. And I guess being the Irishman that I am, of course, I've yacked, but I don't get out much.
I actually got a kind of, I don't know, stern letter from someone who said, you need to shut up, Nick, and let these guests talk more. And I was watching it. Well, and I think there's some truth to it, but I think it's also important I'm having a conversation too, but, so I love, you don't talk too much. Don't worry about that.
Well, thank you.
If you had a piece of advice or something that, a big nugget that you've learned that was really helpful, I'm just curious what that might be. Put you on the spot, but I'm sure there's tons, but.
In the world we live in now, I think it's even harder for artists in a way, because we are subjected to and have at our fingertips the most extraordinary realm of visual imagery via social media that you can imagine.
Yeah.
And in a conversation with, actually locally, there is a painter who used to lecture at Pratt in New York for years. And he said, actually, one of the biggest challenges for younger painters, artists, whatever, sculptors nowadays, is the world of authenticity. Because they have so little time to focus on who they are, because they're constantly seeing who other people are.
Mm-hmm.
It's even more, it's much more magnified now.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice would be, I very rarely work with informative material in my studio. I tend not to have reverential material, but tend to go with my own thoughts.
Yeah.
That would be my advice. Nurture yourself with your own thought.
Yeah, that's beautiful. James, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Art2Life show. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help me get the word out by sharing it with your friends on Instagram at Art2Life_world. The recording of this and all episodes, along with a place to leave comments, see additional photos, and discover a whole new approach to making art, can be found by going to Art2Lifepodcast.com. And secondly, if you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on today, I would super, super appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my artist list, every Sunday morning I send out a video blog all about art making. Go to Art2Lifepodcast.com to sign up. And all these links are in the show notes, of course. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.